drove 2 days across the interstate grid. Straight lines, exit numbers that didn't feel like places, just distances. The paper from the placement office was folded twice in the visor. A county name, a road number, and a farm owner's name printed in block type. I kept glancing up to make sure the paper was still there, as if it could slide out on its own and take the job with it. Fields began before the county sign and kept going after. Grass high on the shoulder, fence posts leaning in a rhythm. Clouds were flat and slow. I eased off the highway onto a 2-lane that ran between rows of something green and uniform. A radio tower on the horizon didn't get any closer for 10 minutes. When it finally did, the signal improved, but the static stayed. The warning board started after the grain silos. Not the kind I was used to. No falling rock, no deer crossing. White boards with black letters, mounted high enough to stare back at the windshield. Avoid stopping for hitchhikers. Do not assist stalled vehicles. Report suspicious activity at the nearest call box. If you strike an animal or other object after dark, remain in your vehicle and proceed directly to a station. The phrasing was dry, like a checklist. I passed 3 of them in a mile and wondered who put them up. County, state, someone else. The nails holding the boards in were new. A siren didn't sound. A horn did. 2 short blasts, closer than expected. In the mirror, a tan car with a light bar. Front grille dusted the same color as the road. The driver's side hand came up and circled the air. I pulled onto the shoulder where the gravel softened and kept my hands on the wheel. The air conditioner tried and failed to keep the cab from smelling like hot plastic. He walked the length of my car slow, looked at the tag, the trunk seam, the rear seat. His boots left prints in the powder. He asked me for the papers, license, registration, in a voice that didn't rise or fall. I handed them over. He read the out-of-state address, then looked at my hands, then the gear piled on the back seat. He asked where I was headed, how long, what for. I said 3 months. Seasonal labor. He asked which farm. I lifted the visor, slid the folded sheet down, and showed him the name. He watched the letters with his jaw set, like he was pronouncing them without sound. Then he told me to follow him to the station, said there were items to pass along to the farm owner, printed notices and boxes, nothing heavy. He didn't ask. He said it like the next step after checking a tail light. I kept 2 car lengths behind him for 30 minutes, long enough to wonder if I should have said I was in a hurry, long enough to notice that every bend in the road looked like the last one. The station was a low brick slab with a flag that hung loose in the heat. 1 soda machine against the wall. Inside, a bench, a window with a cutout, bulletin boards that had been stapled and unstapled so many times they looked freckled. He told me to sit, then went through a door and vanished into a rectangle of fluorescent. There were posters on one board for storms and fires, another for dogs with phone numbers written on pull tabs. A third board was full of faces. Glossy paper, different printers, different years. Missing at the top of each or in the bottom corner, or sometimes stamped in red across a school portrait. Dates that didn't cluster. Names I didn't know. I didn't count them. I looked until my eyes slid off the edges of the frames. A hand touched my shoulder lightly, and I flinched. The deputy stood there with a stack of flattened boxes tied with twine and a manila envelope tucked under his arm. He followed my gaze to the board and said this area stayed quiet unless it didn't, and when it didn't, they didn't have the people to push past the edges. He mentioned campers that never registered, trailers parked on land that wasn't marked on maps, road shoulders wide enough to pull over and forget. He said to call if I saw anything that looked wrong and not to take rides or hand out favors. He said the phones along the road still worked if you hit the black button twice. He didn't say why twice. He put the boxes in my hands, then the envelope, then pointed with his chin at my car, as if reminding me I had somewhere to be. I drove the last miles with the envelope on the passenger seat. It slid on turns, and I set a water bottle on it to keep it still. The farm lane started where a white mailbox leaned and ran straight toward a dark line of trees. Corn on each side made the lane feel thinner than it was. The house at the end sat farther back than I liked. 2 stories, a porch that wrapped and then stopped at the corner, a dog on a short line. The man in the yard had a shotgun broken open over his elbow and a cap pulled low. He lifted his hand, then let it fall to his thigh and kept it there. He said his name, and I nodded. He looked at the boxes, took them, set them by the door with his boot. He told me the room I'd use was on the 3rd floor, second on the right. He told me supper was at 6, breakfast at 5:30. Work started when the sky began to turn. He tapped the dog's head twice, and the dog looked past me at the car and then back at him, breathing slow. Inside, the steps were steeper than I wanted after 2 days of driving. The hallway smelled like bleach over old wood. The room had a metal bed, a window facing the fields, a hook on the back of the door. I rinsed my face and hands at the sink and watched the water darken and then run clear. On the way back down, I saw 3 men at the long table. They kept their hands near their plates and their plates near the edge of the table. Their names came fast and I didn't hold them. They were shorter than me, strong in the forearms, boots clean but scuffed at the toes. We ate without a lot of sound. The food sat heavy and did its job. The next morning lived inside a schedule. 7 to 3. Measure, lift, carry, check. Drums marked with stencils. A small plane rolled out from a low hangar and the owner talked with a man in coveralls and pointed at a wing. A list on a clipboard sat by the door with boxes I was told to tick after checking seals, valves, quantities. The handwriting on the list changed mid-page. Days slid into more of the same. I learned the shape of each field by the way the wind ran through it. Each line of trees by the way the leaves reversed when the weather was about to turn. The plane went out, came back, went out again. I learned to scrape what clogged the intake on a pump and to stop scraping when the sound shifted. I learned the distance from the shed to the far pump house by counting my breath. It took 2 weeks before my head emptied enough to think past the next hour. When it did, my mind made a loop I didn't invite. Back to the station, back to the board of faces, forward to the owner's hand on my shoulder when he told me to take the afternoon and sleep if I wanted. Back again to the deputy's eyes when he asked if I had everything I needed, then watched the answer arrive. Someone had told me, somewhere between the boards and the boxes, that the farm owner liked to drink, liked to reach for people when he did, liked to turn a room toward himself with his voice. Out here he moved slow, kept his voice even, brought out water jugs at a steady time. The dog never pulled. The owner's boots were always dry. The police car returned on a thin afternoon full of heat that didn't lift. It came down the lane easy, dust ahead of the bumper, dust behind. 2 uniforms stepped out and shaded their eyes with hands that had done it before. They asked where the owner was with their mouths closed. I pointed to the outbuildings with my wrist. One of them walked that way, hands open. The other stayed near the porch and looked past me at the rows like he was reading a line he'd seen. Across the yard, voices mixed with the clank of something being moved, laughter that wasn't shaped by anything funny. The deputy who had led me to the station reappeared with 3 of the men from the table. They were walking close, but not together. He said he had other stops to make. He said to tell the owner they'd had a look and would be in town if he came by. His eyes did a slow circuit of the vehicles by the shed, stopped for a half-second at the empty space where a truck might go, then moved on. He told me to drink water if I was working the north block. He went back to the car. It left a fan of dust shaping itself behind the trunk and then falling. I finished my list and wiped my hands. The heat had pulled a smell out of the boards in the little pump house, a sour vinyl and wet iron. A fan pushed air that wasn't cooler, just different. I walked to the back of the yard and checked the garage. I had been told a truck needed work and would be laid up there. The door stood open. The space inside was clean. Oil pans nested in each other in a neat stack. The truck wasn't there. I let the light from the doorway cut a rectangle across the concrete and then stepped back out and into it. When I turned from the garage, one of the men from the table stood close enough to feel present before I saw him. He had a smile that didn't touch his eyes and a way of holding his shoulders that made the distance smaller. He asked what I was looking for without asking. I lifted my hand and rolled my wrist, said I'd left something in my pocket earlier and had come back. He nodded with the smile still there and told me there was plenty to do in the south block before the end of the day. He watched me walk until I passed the corner of the shed, and then the distance returned. Supper came early. The owner wasn't at the table. I ate fast and climbed the stairs, lay down with my boots at the foot of the bed and my shirt over the chair back so I could reach it. Heat filled the room until it fell all at once when the sun left, as if someone had opened a hatch. I slept without meaning to. Noise woke me from below. Not one sound. A succession. Furniture moved, then moved again, then stopped hard. A metal pan hit tile and spun out. Boots on the back step, voices not held down. I stood and put my shirt on and opened the door and took the stairs slow. The bottom hall was lit in rectangles. The air was thick with something that wasn't food and wasn't fire, a sour edge that sat in the throat. In the main room, 2 of the men were on the floor with their hands behind them. A third had a zip tie at his wrist and a knee in the small of his back. Black fabric, hard plastic, bright patches. Commands said like a series of numbers. A hand took my elbow and moved it out and down. The floorboards were a map of old water stains where boots had stood many times. Plastic clicked around my wrists and settled. Cold at first, then normal. Someone asked for names, and someone else wrote them down. Radios answered radios. The sound from the kitchen was singular and followed by the kind of silence that exists only around people waiting to move again. The deputy from the road walked past the doorway and then stepped back and saw me. Our eyes met in a way that felt like an acknowledgement of a previous errand. Nothing more. He told someone to mark me as separate from the others. He told me I would be going in, that they would need every step of my day in order, that I should hold on to each measurement even if I hadn't realized I was keeping it. They took me in. Hours became a timeline on paper. Start time, break. Names in the order I had learned them. Tools in the order I had picked them up. Tasks in the order I had done them. I told them when the plane had left by the sound of it more than the sight. I told them about the empty space in the garage and the fan that didn't make the air cooler. I told them about the schedule sheet with 2 handwritings that met and passed and didn't match. Later, in a room with a camera that buzzed even when it was still, I saw 2 photographs laid side by side. One was the man from the yard, the one with the cap and the slow voice, and the dog that watched without moving. The other was a broad man with a beard that had gone gray without thinning. The deputy tapped the second photo once and said that was the owner, that the first wasn't. He didn't ask me to explain it. He wrote a time next to each photo and underlined the times twice. They kept me a while and then let me go. Paper in a small stack with my name at the top. A card with a number and a line that said to call if I remembered when the handwriting changed on the sheet by the door. The floor in the lobby had been mopped while I was inside. The smell rose and settled. Outside, the flag moved this time. Not much. I drove back through the same flat miles. The board said the same words. The black buttons on the roadside phones were dull with use. The fields didn't look different and didn't need to. Bugs broke on the windshield and left arcs that cleaned to ghost lines when the washer fluid hit. The envelope that had slid on the way in was gone now. The seat was empty. The road took what weight my tires put on it and didn't push back. Somewhere behind me, people I had eaten with were in rooms with hard benches and lights that didn't warm. And beyond them were sheds and a plane, with a wing that held fingerprints I could have matched to a moment if someone had asked sooner. The highway ramp rose and leveled. The line of taillights ahead stacked and unstacked with distance. A number on a green sign approached and passed. The sky had the color of metal left in rain. The next gas station sat alone with its canopy buzzing, a rectangle of white over a dark slab. Doors opening and closing, receipts printing, screens saying, insert, remove, wait, begin, all of it steady, all of it running. The motel sat behind a service station that had lost its brand sign. Just a white rectangle hanging from a rusted pole, no name, no logo. Only the outline where letters used to be. I parked under the flickering light and let the engine tick down. The sound faded slower than I thought it would. The dashboard clock said 11:42. The same minute kept blinking when I looked again. The clerk behind the counter wore gloves cut at the fingers and watched the television above my head. The screen showed snow, not weather, but static. He gave me a key attached to a piece of wood with the number carved in by hand. I asked if the rooms had phones. He said they hadn't worked since spring. He didn't say which spring. The air smelled of diesel soaked into wood. The carpet gave under my shoes like it was holding water. Inside the room, the curtains were thick and stiff. I tried to pull one, and it came halfway, then stopped. The wall heater ticked even before I turned it on. The bedspread had a pattern of faded leaves that didn't repeat evenly. I set my bag by the door and left the envelope from the station on the table, though it was already empty. I had turned it in days ago, but the habit of keeping it near hadn't gone. Outside, a truck passed. It moved too slowly for the size of its headlights. The light filled the room in stripes as it went by. I didn't sleep much. The hum of the sign and the heater blended into one sound. I kept expecting it to stop and didn't want to find out what the silence would feel like if it did. Morning wasn't different. The window fogged and cleared in thin lines. The parking lot held only 3 cars. Mine was one of them. The clerk sat outside with a thermos, watching the road as if something might come from it. I asked if there was work nearby. He said forestry crews were hiring north of the valley. He looked at my hands and said they'd take anyone who could lift and stay quiet. He gave directions using distances measured in bridges, not miles. The road narrowed after the first bridge. Gravel replaced asphalt. Pines leaned close enough that the side mirrors brushed their lower branches. I followed the directions until I saw a sign with letters burned into a board. Hollis Clearing. Below it, smaller letters said, Contractors Only. No company name, no logo again. Just the words like a boundary. A line of trailers sat in a rough semicircle. Diesel tanks, cable spools, piles of cut bark. A man with a clipboard watched me park. His jacket had a patch that had been cut off, the outline still visible where the stitching had been. He asked where I'd come from, then nodded before I answered. He pointed to an open space by the equipment shed and said, You can start there. Work was measured in noise. Chainsaws, loaders, winches, pulling lines of stripped trunks. I marked, stacked, measured again. My gloves turned black and didn't wash clean. The men around me spoke little, their names blurred with the machines. Lunch was taken sitting on crates, backs to the wind. Someone passed around a thermos that smelled like gasoline and sweet fruit at the same time. Nights were colder here. The trailers groaned when the wind shifted. I shared a room with one other worker, a tall man whose hair looked silver even under yellow light. He kept a small radio on the shelf, tuned to a channel that hissed more than it spoke. At times he'd tilt his head and say, They're still searching upstate, or another field's been seized. He never said what kind of field. 3 days in, a supervisor gathered us near the tool shed. He said inspectors were coming, so we'd clear one sector completely before dusk. He didn't say what they were inspecting. We worked until the air turned to dust. When the sun dropped, the trunks looked like lines of black ribs. The supervisor left in a truck with a covered bed. The rest of us stayed behind. That night the generator failed. Not all at once, but like someone turning a dimmer in slow circles. The radio hiss deepened until it became a low pulse. My roommate rolled over and said he could still hear the saws, though none were running. I stayed awake and counted between the pulses until they matched my breath. The next day, 2 unmarked vehicles arrived. Dark paint, no plates. The men who got out wore jackets without insignia. They didn't speak to us directly. They walked the site, pointed at the hills, took photographs of soil. One of them picked up a fragment of tape with a number written on it, folded it twice, and put it in his pocket. When they left, the supervisor told us to shift the stacks farther from the boundary. He said the ground was unstable there. No one argued. Later that afternoon, I found a trench behind the supply tent. Fresh dig, the soil darker than the rest, Still wet. Shovel marks too neat to be casual. I didn't touch it. A rope tied around a stake ran along its edge as if marking property. On the stake was a tag with faded print, Region 7/Property Control. The font didn't match any of the new paperwork. I took a photo with my phone out of reflex and deleted it the moment it saved. No signal anyway. Evening stretched longer the farther north we went. The horizon refused to darken. The workers smoked, stared, didn't talk. One mentioned that every 2 weeks a delivery came and nobody signed for it. Just barrels unloaded, sealed, marked Storage T in black paint. The lids were dented but intact. They were stacked behind the main shed. The smell near them was chemical, not fuel. When wind came from that side, eyes watered. The man with the silver hair stopped coming back to the trailer after that. His bed stayed unmade. His radio was gone. The supervisor said he'd been transferred to another sector. I didn't ask where. The next morning, his name tag hung on a nail outside the mess tent. The wind flipped it back and forth until it snapped off. On the 7th day, I followed a sound down the slope. Not the saws, not the trucks. A drone, steady and low. At the base of the ridge, 2 workers were rolling one of the barrels toward a pit lined with plastic. The letters STORAGET faced upward. They tipped it, and for a moment, the sound stopped. The air shimmered as if heat were rising from a stove, but it wasn't heat. The smell was sharp, electric, cold. They covered the pit with tarps and shoveled dirt over the edges. When they looked up, one of them nodded at me like I'd already been seen there before. That evening, the supervisor handed out pay slips printed on yellow paper. The dates were missing. The totals were even numbers, all ending in zeros. He told me my next shift would start in a new section past the creek. He said we'd move camp soon. His tone didn't fit the words. It sounded like he was reminding himself. I walked to the creek before dark. The water was shallow, full of branches stripped of bark. Each one looked like a limb smoothed by years of handling. Across the bank, a clearing widened toward the hills. Something white flickered among the pines, fabric or paper, then was gone. When I returned, the generator was running again, but the sound was different. Higher, thinner, like a voice filtered through static. Inside the trailer, the heater had been unplugged. My gloves lay folded on the table, though I hadn't left them that way. I opened them and found a tag between the palms. Region 7 again. Same faded print, same numbers. I set it on the window ledge and watched the wind try to lift it. Around midnight, headlights swept across the clearing. Too many for one vehicle. Engines idling, voices low. I stepped outside, boots sinking slightly in the thawing ground. Figures moved between the shadows of the equipment. Flashlights snapped on and off. No shouting, just movement, deliberate and rehearsed. One of them raised a hand and pointed toward the slope. From where I stood, I could see the tarp edge flapping near the pit. The wind had pulled some of the dirt away. The smell came back, colder than before. I turned and walked toward the trailers, but the lights reached me first, white, bright, flattening everything. A voice said something I didn't catch. The radio inside the nearest truck clicked twice, like a code. Then silence. Then a new order I couldn't make out, muffled by the wind. Someone tapped my shoulder and told me to step back. The ground gave slightly under my heel, soft with thaw. Beyond the lights, a shape moved on the ridge, too high to belong to anyone on foot. It glinted once, metal or glass, then vanished behind the line of trees. The deputy from the earlier county wasn't there, but I thought of him anyway. Of his voice when he said to remember the handwriting change, the black button pressed twice, the faces on the board. I held the edge of the trailer door, waited for a command that didn't come. The engines idled lower, then rose again. Radios crackled, words half-spoken. The lights began to fade in sequence, one after another, until only the generator hum remained. I stood there until my breath clouded the air and dissolved. Behind me, something small hit the ground. A tag, or maybe a nail, or maybe nothing at all. The night stayed open, the pines leaning inward as if listening. The air moved once, carrying the smell of oil and iron and rain. I could see the creek catching the light from the last headlamp as it tilted away, turning the water white for a second before it went dark again. I stepped forward, counting each sound between one heartbeat and the next, waiting to see which one would stop first. The wind off the bay carried salt, but no tide. It pushed the smell inland until even the buildings tasted metallic. I parked near the dock where a faded sign said, Warehouse District 9, though half the letters had peeled away. The office that processed reclamation permits sat between two storage hangars, its roof patched with corrugated metal. I had been sent there by a message that didn't have a name attached, just a line. Retrieve what's left of the report. Inside, the air hummed with refrigeration units. The clerk looked up, didn't ask for identification, just slid a clipboard across the counter. My name was already on the form. Date, location, signature space blank. The boxes behind him were labeled by region codes. R7 appeared 3 times. I wrote the date in full, not the short form, as if the extra characters might make it feel real. He pointed to a door marked Archive 2A. The key was already in the lock. The corridor smelled of dust that had absorbed oil. The lights buzzed, 1 in 4 flickering. Each shelf held binders with spine tags in faded green ink. I found the one with the right code by counting backward from the current year. Inside were plastic sleeves, photos, incident logs, soil readings. The last page was missing. The number sequence skipped. Someone had torn it cleanly, not hastily. A note was folded between the pages. Same handwriting as the deputy's reports from months before, block letters, deliberate. It said only, "They moved it north." Don't follow the roads. I read it twice and put it back where it had been. On the shelf above, another binder had no label. Inside were aerial photographs, snow, timber lines, the pale scars of cut roads. In the corner of one print, a shadow of a small aircraft. The wing bore no registration mark. The angle of sunlight made it look like a cross scratched into ice. I closed the binder, wiped my hands, and left them clean on my pants. Outside, the dock workers moved pallets from a barge. The crates bore stenciled codes, Freight 31, Northern Route. A supervisor with a yellow armband shouted orders that the wind tore apart. The air tasted faintly of diesel and brine. I watched one crate split when a hook slipped. Inside were cylinders wrapped in foil. No markings except a black strip around the cap. One worker cursed softly, but no one approached the spill. They taped the crack and moved on. At the end of the pier, a booth held a sign-in log for drivers. The names repeated every few lines, same handwriting, same initials. Under remarks, the same note appeared. Transfer to storage T. The word storage followed me more than names did now. I stayed at a boarding house 3 blocks inland. The owner spoke little, just collected rent in cash and left envelopes of receipts on the door. The walls were thin enough to hear the fridge humming next door. Each night, trucks passed outside, headlights cutting the window shade in half. I started writing the days down by time, not event. 0500, 0930, 1600, 2245. Small anchors in a long day that otherwise didn't split. On the 4th morning, a letter came without postage. The envelope had a faint ring of moisture as if it had been left on a wet surface. Inside was a photo printed on matte paper. It showed a clearing, the same type of barrels, the same soil line, but the trees were gone. The timestamp was newer by weeks. Across the bottom corner typed in red, Project Victor, active. No sender. The postmark was blurred into a gray stain. I drove out of town that afternoon. The highway north was half ice, half gravel. Trucks loaded with pipes passed without slowing. Around dusk, the road narrowed to a single lane that ended at a gate. The fence beyond it was topped with sensor wire that blinked red, slow and even. A small sign read, Property of Environmental Logistics Corp. Entry by permit only. No contact number, no office address. I sat there until the engine cooled enough to make small pops, then turned back. At a gas stop 50 kilometers south, I saw the same logo on a man's sleeve. He was filling cans from a side pump labeled Aviation. The emblem was stitched over the outline of a bird. Wings down, talons extended. When he caught me looking, he smiled without showing teeth. "Heading north?" he asked. I said I was only passing through. "Then don't stop where the markers change," he said, twisting the cap shut. "You'll know it when you see it." He placed the can in the back of his truck and drove off without paying. The attendant didn't notice. The further I drove, the more the map became decoration. Signs lost their lettering under frost. The odometer clicked, but distance meant less. Near midnight, I reached a ridge where the forest thinned to stone. In the valley below, a strip of light stretched straight, white and constant, as if a runway had been carved into ice. Small figures moved along it, dots of heat in the cold field. I cut the headlights and waited. Engines hummed far below, steady, mechanical, the kind of sound that repeats until it erases itself. I recorded the coordinates on the dashboard notepad. 62 degrees 21 minutes north, 135 degrees 7 minutes west. The pen scratched, the ink blotted. When I looked again, the last digits had bled into each other. The sound from below grew sharper, then stopped entirely. A single flash lit the valley, brief, white, silent. The afterimage stayed longer than the light. When it faded, the valley was empty. The line of brightness had gone dark as if it had never been there. I sat until my breath fogged the windshield and left it opaque. When I wiped it, the reflection showed only my face, pale in the dash glow. Behind me, the forest swayed. Each trunk moved slightly, the branches brushing one another like dry paper. The radio clicked twice, static filling the car. No voice, just the rhythm of the same 2 clicks the deputy had once described. I turned the knob off. The static stayed for 3 more seconds before cutting. At dawn, I drove down the ridge. The valley held no road, no lights, no tracks. Only a flat strip of melted snow where the light had been. At its center, a circle of dark soil steamed in the cold. The smell rose clean, chemical, not decay. I stood there with my boots sinking half an inch and counted each breath until the air felt even again. When I turned back toward the car, I noticed the tag caught on the front wiper, laminated, weathered, stamped with the same code. Region 7. The edges were singed. I put it in the glove compartment without looking further. The sky brightened but gave no warmth. The radio remained silent. The last gas station was 100 kilometers behind, the next unmarked. Every kilometer marker leaned the same way, numbers fading in order. The road bent east and leveled against the wind. By the time I reached the turnoff marked Maintenance Access Only, the snow had started again. Thin flakes that landed and vanished, leaving small, wet circles on the glass. I followed the track until it ended in a field of frost-cracked earth. Nothing waited there, only the faint sound of machinery under the ground, steady as breathing, somewhere deep enough that it didn't echo. I stayed until my watch second hand slipped past the hour twice, then drove back toward the bay. The horizon stayed level, the color of old iron, the same as before. The wind sharpened as the valley closed behind me. The road followed the river north for several hours until it lost the guardrails and turned to packed snow. The GPS screen froze halfway through a turn, the line stopping where the signal quit. I drove by the texture of the ground instead of direction. Tracks appeared and disappeared like veins beneath frost. When I reached the sign that said, Maint Access 4B, the lettering was carved into ice rather than painted. The gate was open. The chain hung loose, its lock missing the shackle. I stopped long enough to see if it had been cut. The metal edges were smooth, not broken. Beyond the gate, tire prints overlapped until they became one wide path leading toward the trees. The first structure looked temporary. Sheet metal walls, A generator sunk into snow, wires running from a pole into the ground instead of overhead. The air smelled faintly of coolant. A clipboard hung from a nail on the door. The paper inside was laminated against weather. REG7, containment log. Below that, dates arranged in 2 columns, none newer than the week before. The signature line was blank on every page. I opened the door and felt the weight of the insulation pull against the hinges. Inside, heat. Not warm, but dense. The floor was plywood laid over metal plates. Condensation crawled down the seams. A single bulb burned at the center, not flickering, not bright. Tables lined both sides, covered in clear plastic. Under the first sheet, rows of small glass cylinders, each labeled with numbers instead of words. The next held soil samples, identical in color though tagged as separate. The last table was empty except for a single folded tarp. A sound started behind me, compressor or pump, then stopped halfway. When I turned, the door had eased halfway shut though I hadn't touched it. Air shifted, carrying the metallic cold of outside mixed with something sharp, ozone-like. I checked the generator through the window. The exhaust had stopped. The lights didn't dim. I took 3 photos on my phone. The flash painted the room blue for a second. When the light faded, moisture on the walls glimmered like a film. I pocketed the phone, stepped back out, and the temperature hit me hard enough to make the lens fog again. Beyond the first shed stood 2 larger hangars. Their doors were locked with coated pads, but one side panel had been left open just wide enough for a person. Inside, the floor dipped toward a drain covered by a metal grate. The smell was stronger here, chemical, not decay, close to disinfectant but heavier. Racks lined the walls with empty canisters, each with a red stripe across the middle. A single clipboard lay on the ground. The page read, "Transfer order / dest port V, no sender. Only a time stamp, 0200. Footprints circled the drain, leading nowhere else. I followed them until they faded into the pattern of the metal floor. A faint vibration passed through the soles of my boots, steady as a machine running deep below. It repeated every 6 seconds. Outside, the wind carried the noise upward, thinning it. Snow moved across the ground in sheets. I walked toward a line of container boxes stacked 2 high. Each bore the same company initials as before. One container door was unlatched. The latch itself swung gently, tapping the metal in a rhythm almost in time with the pulse underfoot. Inside the container, rows of sealed drums stood upright, their lids bolted with fresh welds. The floor beneath them was clean. In the corner, a clipboard hung by wire with 1 sheet. Hollis clearing / material redeployment. Below, a line, field personnel transferred. No list followed. The air inside was warmer than outside, rising from vents low to the ground. The vents exhaled slow, even breaths. I watched the condensation drift, then stepped out and let the door close. The latch settled without my help. I crossed the yard toward what looked like a trailer office. Its window blinds were drawn tight. A small red light blinked above the door, not in pattern, but pulse. The key slot was frozen over. I hit it once with the edge of a wrench until the ice cracked. The handle turned easily. Inside, the heat returned. Electric, dry, humming. Desks lined both sides, papers stacked high. A radio sat on one corner, low static rolling through the speaker. Beside it, a list of call signs. The first was crossed out. The second, circled. Next to the circled one, a note. Remote relay active / do not broadcast. I sat down and touched the receiver. The static rose slightly, then dipped. I didn't transmit. The channel clicked twice on its own, a pause, then 2 more. Same rhythm I had heard before. The mic smelled faintly of metal warmed by hands. I set it down and listened until the pattern ended. Files on the desk were stamped in red. Logistics Core. Restricted. I opened one. Inside were photographs printed on thermal paper, gray and white. Each showed a section of forest cleared to the soil. In the center of each frame, an object that looked like a collapsed tent, or maybe fabric stretched across poles. Every image had coordinates typed at the bottom. Some of them matched the ridge where I had stopped the car days ago. A drawer under the desk held a small recorder, battery still in. I pressed play. A man's voice came through, flat, Midwestern accent softened by static. Field Team 5 complete transfer. Maintain containment at surface temperature. Do not re-enter Zone Delta until readings fall below threshold. Repeat, no entry before decay. The recording ended with 3 clicks. The same rhythm again. I rewound it, listened twice, wrote the transcript by hand. The sound of the wind outside thickened, pressing against the walls until the trailer shook. Papers fluttered once, then settled as the air stilled. When I stepped back outside, snow had risen halfway up the container wheels. Footprints leading from the hangar were already half erased. The generator light had gone out, but the vibration underfoot continued. The sound felt deeper now, like it came from below the frost line. I walked toward the tree line, counting the beats in the snow until the vibration stopped. It didn't fade. It cut off clean, like a switch. For a moment, the world balanced in that silence. No engine, no wind, no sound from the radio inside. Only the cold and the small creak of ice forming along the metal. Then, from somewhere far down the valley, a new sound started. A low surge that rose and fell, mechanical but irregular, as if a motor were fighting itself. The snow under my boots trembled once, then steadied. I turned toward the direction of the bay, but the horizon was hidden behind a wall of white. I stood there until the cold pushed through the seams of my coat, the world narrowing to breadth and distance. Behind me, the red light above the trailer door blinked once more, slower this time, and stayed on. I started walking. The snow carried my steps without giving them back. The ground leveled where the forest thinned. Snow gave way to packed dirt, streaked with gravel, as if the surface had been cleared by machines rather than weather. A road sign without paint leaned against a post. Its metal still held warmth from the last light of day. Far ahead, between the pines, the outline of a fence cut the horizon in half. Steel mesh, bent inward, topped with coiled wire that had turned white with frost. The air didn't move. I could hear my own boots flex against the frozen ground. Somewhere under the surface, water shifted, dull and heavy. Each step made a small hollow sound that disappeared too fast. I reached the fence and followed it until I found a break, a section where the lower wires had been cut and twisted apart. No prints on either side. The edges were clean, the kind of cut made with a saw meant for cable. Beyond the fence lay a field of debris. Containers, crushed drums, folded tarps, lengths of pipe. Some of it was covered with snow, some with ice. Each object cast a shallow reflection, dim blue under the sky's pale light. At the center of the field, a rectangular pit stretched for 20 meters. Its edges were lined with wooden planks held by stakes, like a temporary excavation. I stepped close enough to see that the floor was lined with black fabric. The wind rose once, pushed fine snow across the opening, then fell silent again. A small shed stood nearby. The door was open, not wide, just enough to move with the air. Inside, a lamp burned on a desk. The bulb glowed low, almost orange. A generator hummed behind the wall, a faint vibration through the floor. Papers were pinned across a corkboard, maps, chemical readouts, coordinates, all stamped with the same code, Project V/Region 7/Site Beta. Beneath the maps, a clipboard hung from a nail, half the pages torn away. The top sheet listed arrival times and initials. The last entry had been crossed out. Under remarks, retrieval in progress. The air in the shed smelled of burnt insulation. On the desk sat a recorder, newer than the one from the trailer. I pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a voice, low and deliberate. Temperature stable. Containment complete. Initiate removal before surface thaw. A pause. Then another voice. Confirming negative readings. Prepare transport. Authorization. The tape cut off before the word ended. I looked through the window toward the pit. The snow there had started to sink at the center, the surface softening, the black fabric showing through like skin beneath thin ice. A pole had been planted beside it with a small flag. Red, torn at the edge. Numbers written in marker ran down the pole's side. 37.42/118.09. Coordinates, but not ones I recognized. Behind the shed, a row of tracks led away toward the tree line. Not tire marks, not boots. Something wider, flat, like sled runners. They ran in parallel until they vanished into the dark line of forest. I followed them for about 50 meters before they disappeared under fresh snow. The trees grew denser there, their trunks close enough that light barely touched the ground. I stopped when the air grew warmer, the kind of warmth that comes from trapped moisture rather than heat. I turned back. The flag by the pit now hung straight down, no wind to hold it out. The generator tone had changed, slower, uneven. Inside the shed, the light flickered once and steadied. The maps on the wall fluttered at the edges as if air moved behind them. A drawer half open showed metal tags inside, each stamped with a code. Some matched the ones I'd seen before. Hollis/storage T/region 7. Others bore new markings. Ret 12, Ret 13. The sequence stopped at 13. I took one tag, turned it over. The backside was blank except for a small indentation, circular, as if something had once been embedded there and removed. I put it back and closed the drawer. The air felt heavier, pressing down through my jacket. I heard water somewhere close. Steady dripping, not rain, deeper than the soil. I walked to the pit again. The snow at the edge had collapsed inward, revealing a layer of clear ice beneath. Through it, dark shapes pressed upward, angles too clean to be stone, too regular to be natural. Light from the shed reflected off the surface, showing rows, grids, faint metallic seams. The ice fogged as I exhaled, cleared again as if it were breathing with me. I stepped back and wrote down what I saw. Depth, approximately 4 meters. Visible structure beneath. No movement. A sound broke the stillness. A mechanical click, distant, repeating in pairs. The same rhythm I'd heard from every recording, every transmission. 2 clicks, pause, 2 clicks. The radio on the desk inside the shed answered with static. I didn't touch it. It pulsed twice, then silence. I checked my watch. The second hand was stuck between marks. The face had fogged over from the inside. The generator faltered again, caught itself, kept running. The lamp dimmed, brightened, held steady. I wrote the time by estimate. 1740, locale. The tracks behind me had changed. Where I had walked from the trees, new impressions overlapped my own. Same width, same depth, but angled slightly, as if dragged beside. I followed them back toward the road. Each step sank deeper now. The air carried a sound that wasn't quite wind, more like vibration through hollow metal. I reached the fence before it registered that the gate had closed. The chain hung as before, but the lock was back. Frost had formed where the gap used to be. I didn't force it. Instead, I followed the fence line until it curved toward a ridge. There, half buried in snow, a service box jutted from the ground. Its panel was open, switches exposed. The inside was warm to the touch. A sticker on the cover read ELC/property monitor. The wires ran underground toward the site. A small green light blinked every 6 seconds, in rhythm with the pulse beneath the soil. I sat beside the box and listened. The wind had gone still again. Each blink lit the snow faintly, casting shadows that vanished as soon as they appeared. Somewhere below, a low hum rose and fell, mechanical but not constant, like a system breathing in intervals. On the opposite hill, headlights flashed once, brief and unfocused. A vehicle, or maybe reflection. Then nothing. The road behind me was flat and empty. My phone had no signal, only the clock screen blinking the wrong time. The last battery bar dropped while I watched it. I wrote coordinates again in the notebook, using the same pencil worn down to half its size. The graphite left pale lines. When the hum beneath the ground stopped, the light on the box stayed on. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no distant machinery, not even the sound of cooling metal. I waited for something to start again. Nothing did. I stood, brushed the snow from my sleeves, and walked toward the ridge until the sight fell out of view. By the time I reached the road, night had come without dark. The sky stayed a dull gray, bright enough to see the tracks I'd left, but not enough to show where they led. I kept walking until the fence line ended and the terrain opened into a wide, flat expanse. The horizon was empty except for a single light miles away, steady and white. I marked the direction with my compass and started toward it. Hours later, the ground turned to ice again. The light grew closer but no larger. It wasn't a building or vehicle. It was a tower, thin, metal, with a single beacon at the top. At its base, a small outpost building, door ajar, the hinges creaking faintly in the cold. Inside, a desk, a switchboard, 3 radios stacked on top of each other, a notebook open to the last page, words written in pencil pressed deep into the paper. Retrieval complete. Transfer confirmed. Site sealed below that. Coordinates, different from the ones before. Eastward. I copied them into my own notebook and closed the cover. When I stepped outside, the beacon blinked once, paused, blinked again. The same rhythm. 2 flashes, pause, 2 flashes. It continued even as the wind returned, scattering snow across the ground. The sound beneath the surface never came back, but the pattern stayed, repeating in the air, marking time that no longer matched any clock. I turned away from the tower and began the walk back toward the road. My tracks stretched behind me until they vanished in the drifting snow. The horizon didn't change. The color didn't change. The light stayed constant, detached from night or morning. By the time I reached the fence again, it was buried halfway. The tag on the gate had iced over. The red letters beneath the frost were still visible enough to read, Region 7/terminated. I wrote it down once, slowly, then closed the notebook and didn't open it again. That's it for today. Please press like and subscribe.